All right, let's go ahead and call this special session to order. We have a couple items on tonight's agenda. Well, the first one being discussion regarding the proposed Campus Corner pedestrian safety plan. And Mr. I almost said Mr. Sorry, Officer, Lieutenant.
Pendleton.
Well, I knew that part, but Lieutenant Pendleton.
Yes.
All right, I'm looking forward to hearing about this. I had some feedback from OU students, so take it away.
Outstanding. Well, we'll make this short and sweet. I work night shift. I've been on the Division III for about 2 years now. I just finished my second year, and since I came back to night shift working nights, the Campus Corner area looked very different. Not necessarily in how it's built or anything like that, but as far as just how busy it was. Campus Corner is very, very busy. There are a number of different businesses down there that are pulling a lot of extra folks down there. And what I noticed immediately was a number of safety issues. So we've talked about some of the safety issues that we saw. I'll actually try to turn the lights down here if I can remember that without breaking something. There we go. There's a number of pictures that we'll look at, so I want to make sure that everyone can see the photos as we move forward. So we're talking about the Campus Corner area. Primarily, we're looking at that area that's Duffy to Boyd and Asp over to University. Everyone's familiar with that area. But a lot of folks are coming out there, somewhere between 2,000 to 3,000, probably at a low estimate as far as how busy it gets on the weekend nights. And we're talking about Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights into Sunday morning. So it can be pretty busy, but it is narrow. Every street that you go down there is narrow. Buchanan is extremely narrow. We'll talk about White Street, but Asp is also very narrow. And Asp is where we're having the most trouble with our folks on this area. So as we look here, this is the area in question. We're going to focus highly on the city's parking lot there at 710 Asp. That's going to be a great resource for us. And so that's going to be one of the ways that's going to work into our plan. And so we want to focus on this area as we look. So right now, we're seeing a bunch of what we are terming close calls. A bunch of folks are almost getting hit by cars. And I say almost being hit, and a couple times they're tapped by cars. A few weeks ago, there was a young man who was hit by a Jeep as it drove by. The Jeep driver wasn't really paying attention. The guy walking across the street wasn't really paying attention. And so when the mirror hit him, he got upset, the driver of the Jeep got upset, and they're both upset with each other, but neither were paying attention. So these things happen all the time. Now, of course, there are a few people that may have enjoyed a few intoxicating beverages. Believe it or not, that happens in Norman. There are just challenges when you're that close and everything's that tight, and you have so many large vehicles, and we're having more and more large vehicles. It is hard to see in that area. And so there's the addition of rideshare, which we love rideshare because the area clears out extremely quickly. There was a time where there used to be big groups of people that would just linger and hang out and form big groups for a long time, but now rideshare helps our folks get out of there pretty fast. The problem is that rideshare likes to stop in the middle of the street. And they can legally, they have 30 minutes to load and unload, which is not unreasonable. But the problem is that there's parking spaces and loading zones that they just don't want to use. Sometimes folks think that they're Uber or Lyft, that gives them diplomatic immunity, and they're free to do everything, but it causes some traffic concerns for us. So as we move forward, here are some of the issues, and I know it's really dark and hard to see, but we've got, this is body cam footage, and so I wanted to make sure you guys can see exactly what we're seeing. So we've got a huge group of kids here, and they just walked out into the middle of the road. They decided, hey, we want to go across, and these cars need to wait for us. This car had to slam on their brakes. There's another car right behind them. And so this is typical of a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night. These kind of things happen pretty consistently. A few more photos here. This young lady was walking out and trying to get into this side of this car. This car here on the left, it decided that it was tired of waiting and just drove around to the oncoming lanes of traffic because they got impatient and frustrated. And once again, this happens periodically. You also have a large crowd of folks that are gathered over there on the left side. And you would be amazed how often we need to remind adults to wait on the sidewalk and not in the street. But these things happen pretty often. This is a normal occurrence. Again, these two young people, these lovebirds, are really happy that they're getting to go over there and hang out at Diamond Dogs and get something to eat. Unfortunately, they didn't notice the big Ford Ford F-150 coming right at them. Again, slammed on his brakes and not hit these folks. And this is a constant deal. We're seeing this all the time. We're very fortunate that we haven't had a very serious accident. There's some other crowding issues. So one thing that the Uber drivers are doing when they do pull over, they're pulling up next to the curb, but it's so narrow that no one can pass around them. And so you have these folks that are just pulling right up next to the curb, and then across the street you've got another one. And so how does someone who actually wants to travel down Asp go when you got people that are holding up on both sides? this big group of young men and women, there's a huge group of them, didn't bother to look. They just decided there's more of us than there are of the cars, right? So we're just gonna walk across. And again, car had slammed on their brakes to not hit them. Again, this is a continual issue that we have consistently. And so the question came up, well, do we start writing people tickets for jaywalking? Well, who does that help? Does that help anyone? Especially when you add a little bit of alcohol into the situation, it's not going to fix anything for anyone. It's just going to make things more complicated and more difficult with our relationship with our citizens. So here's the other issue that we have, a safety issue. This was on Buchanan. So when places close, everyone starts moving out into the roadway. And so Buchanan, if you are familiar with that area, it's just a really, really narrow. Buchanan is actually an alley. It's not actually just a regular legal street. And so it's pretty narrow to begin with. Now you add all of these folks into the sidewalk and into the roadway, and these folks do what most folks do down there. When they can't use the sidewalk, they just decide that they're going to travel down the street because the sidewalk's done. Well, there's still cars that have to travel on that sidewalk, down the roadway. And so this is a pretty common occurrence for us as well. Now Kongs is no longer the problem that they were for us. We were having quite a few problems with Kongs as an entity. We have new management there, and hopefully things are going to move a little smoother for us. We're hopeful. But the other issue that comes up is when you have emergency vehicles. So the crowding that's here is even blocking the ability for people even to get there. You can't even go down the alleyway, you can't get into the roadway to even walk safely. This is what happens whenever we open up, when everything closes at the end of the night. And this night in particular was fairly challenging. We had a fight that happened right next to Collins in the parking lot, and a young man was knocked unconscious, had a brain bleed, ended up in the ICU. One of my officers got swung on by another young man that was involved in that altercation. And so when we get emergency vehicles down there, then nothing moves. Nothing whatsoever moves. So you have a fire truck, you have an ambulance, and you have Uber drivers, and the Uber drivers are wanting to know, well, how quickly can I move? I need to go on and you can pick up more people because this is what I do. Well, nothing's moving on Buchanan. If there's an emergency vehicle there, nothing's going to move. And so it gets to be really, really narrow, really, really challenging. And most of the time, these folks are moving from this area back over to ASP, but it's the process of getting them back to ASP once everything closes. So here's our plan. We want to close down the area on Asp Avenue from the bottom of the Hertz Donuts parking lot, the south end there, all the way down to Boyd Street. This is also going to be a component with the one-way direction of White Street from Asp Avenue to University. Right now it's two-way, and we'll talk about some of the dimensions that are working there. We're also going to use the city's parking lot there on Asp Avenue as a staging area for our rideshare folks and for taxis. And then we'll also have a pickup location there on White Street. That way, those folks who stage in that parking lot can come southbound on Asp, turn west on White Street, and just pick up folks or drop them off and keep on moving. They have other options there. So this is the area in question. Right now, this is the parking lot here. We would designate some of the parking spaces there. And as you look at the traffic flow here, they would come down southbound. And this area is actually a little bit further south, right there to the edge of the Hertz Donuts parking lot. And that's where we will close. And traffic flow will come south, then it'll go west. But right now, it's two-way, and so one-way makes it a lot easier. And so the traffic pattern, if people want to come back to the area, will just flow around back to University, back down to Boyd, and they can come back up Buchanan if they would like to. So it just makes it fairly easy for people to navigate. They can go northbound, of course, on Buchanan. There are 6 different ways for people to get from Buchanan north of White Street back to Asp Avenue if they'd like to. So there were some concerns that were brought up potentially on people not being able to get back to Asp, but there are lots of different opportunities to get back there. So this is a far more complicated version. This looks far more complicated than it really is. There are 13 signs involved. It's a lot simpler than this, but this is essentially the concept of how this will be deployed. It'll look very much like game day. And so game day will have the south end here closed right at Boyd Street. We will not have all the accoutrement there in the middle. We'll leave some of that stuff in the middle out of there, but that'll be an open area where pedestrians can come and go and cross the street freely. And right below the Hertz Donuts parking lot, they will be able to have that block there as well. We'll have police cars on the inside of the barriers here and police cars on the inside of the barrier on the north end. So it's a total of about 4 cars, 3 at a minimum, 4 max. And the reason why we have that many is because I have at least 1 officer at the south end. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, go ahead and finish that, but I have a question after you talk about it.
Sure. At least 1 officer at the south end, at least 1 officer at the north end to make sure that we can get people in and out, and then more than likely I will be in the area or my other lieutenant counterpart will be in the area as well. And so one thing that we did on Friday when we shut down is we had an extra police car that was not actually manned. We used that vehicle to block the south intersection, primarily because I was concerned on a Friday night we get fairly busy. And so with 13 officers on shift, if things went busy and had to leave someone, I wanted to make sure we didn't leave that unmanned and that it wasn't blocked appropriately. So one of my guys ended up having to go take a call, so there were only 2 of us down there, but we still had this area safely blocked and on the north end. So there were 3 cars, 2 of us down there, or 4 cars and 3 of us down there. Yes,
That kind of leads into my question. In some sort of disaster, or where, heaven forbid, an officer down or something like that, and everyone has to leave, are you able to do that safely as things are set up, even with crowds?
It's a very easy setup and tear down.
Okay.
And so the setup and tear down, actually when we set up, we go from the south end to the north end. And if we need to leave immediately, the extra signs, so there's 5 signs that are primarily here in this area as far as road closed. The extra ones, those are ones that go on the roadside and they're easy to pick up. And so these ones, I timed our tear down last week and we tore down in 15 minutes. And that was not trying to go fast. And so I imagine if we need to go quickly, we can do it much faster.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Move forward. So this is what it'll look like a little bit for us. Right now, White Street is a little bit of a challenge. So it's going 2-way right now, and even just from our overhead image, you can see that it's a very narrow area. If you've never traveled on White Street, it's extremely narrow. We're wanting to turn that 1-way in the westbound direction, and that would make things move a little bit a little easier, especially when it comes to our closure on Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights. So here's what we're looking at when it comes to White Street. It's 24 feet wide. There's an 8-foot parking area there on the north side, and that only leaves 16 feet for road travel on that left side. So the problem here is that a legal minimum lane width is 9 feet. So we're at 8, so we're short there 2 feet on a legal change there. So what we would like to do is have a standard width, if at all possible, but right now it's just not there. The other big problem is that pedestrian traffic on the north side, that's fine, but most people are coming from the south, and that sidewalk that's on the south side of the road is just not a sidewalk. I actually measured it, and from these poles to the curb, it's actually my foot length. I know I have ginormous feet, so it's a little bit different, but it's just not safe for a normal sized person to really travel that and have cars coming back and forth. It's kind of a balancing act as I can use. So what we would like to do is to have some adjustments here. So the possible plan is to continue with the 8-foot parking area. We would turn 1-way westbound, and I would leave 10 feet for a legal actual 1-way lane. That's not there now. It's not currently budgeted, but it's possible in the future to have a 6-foot actual ADA compliant sidewalk there on that south end. If at all possible, that would be great to kind of add in addition to what we have planned. So that would make it easy for people to use that 1-way rather than fighting their way through a 2-way. That's not actually legally wide enough. So the plan itself, we need that approval through the city council. We cannot change a roadway permanently from one direction to the other. We talked about possibly doing sometimes versus other times, and that could be possibly confusing, but of course, any option that we can use to keep our folks safer is what we want to do. And so, different ideas that came up is there were concerns about whether or not people would know how to get back to ASP if they went Buchanan 1-way. And so there'd be plenty of signage directing people back to ASP Avenue. That came up from discussion with the Campus Corner Merchants Association. So there'd be plenty of signage, things that are available. Not only signage for that area, but also for our rideshare and for our taxis. Plenty of rideshare spaces that are indicated so that people know where they can park, where they can stage, and also where they can pick up there on White Street. Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Patron?
So, again, are we going to be doing the e-scooters in that same area for a kind of
Like a nest?
nest? Yes.
So we don't have a bird's nest designated location yet, and that's a communication that I haven't got back from them. Bird is not very good at returning communication.
This is my surprised face.
Which one of our staff?
So if there's someone that I can, if so,
It
share
was
contact,
Terry, now
I'd
it went
love reach
to
out them.
Sarah Kaplan has
Okay.
been. You might check with her. She's been the new point contact since Terry's,
Perfect.
and we kind of brought this up last week as well. So
Yes.
maybe the two of you can collaborate on that.
Perfect, glad to. Perfect. And so right now it's really, really easy to direct folks to this area as far as where they can pick up or drop off, because on the ASP side, there's that big giant red 1 that people can see on White Street. And then right there at Buchanan, there's a big giant arrow that points down, so it's easy to point folks in that direction. So this is seasonal. It's when the school's in session and it's busy. We pay attention to what's happening with the school calendar, and we're only going to do this when it's necessary. So up until last week, For some reason, this semester has been a little bit quieter as far as Campus Corner goes. There haven't been as many students out as they normally have been, and so we hadn't closed until on Friday night was our first time we closed. We closed at about 11:30 and we tore down at about 2 a.m. It was initially we weren't going to close because it was fairly like a ghost town out there, and then a bunch of folks got back from date parties and from the state fair, and they decided let's go to Campus Corner. And so we closed down a little bit later than planned, and it worked really, really well. It was smooth. There were some concerns about how many police cars were out there, but again, there were 3 or 4 the entire time. And then it's a pretty simple detour, and essentially this plan was in a partnership between the traffic division and us. We sat down and I asked a lot of questions, and they were very patient with me because there's a lot of stuff that I just didn't know. I was like, hey, I have a car, it's got lights on it, we can shut this bad boy down. It just wasn't that simple. So here we are in the process, but it's a really simple plan when it actually goes into implementation. We did it on Friday night and on Saturday night. Saturday night they closed down about 10 p.m. and they tore down about 12:15 because things have slowed down a little bit. So as soon as it's slow enough for us to tear down, we'll tear down, and if it's not needed, we won't deploy at all. Now you asked about emergency situations. The Thursday before, we were actually ready to deploy because it was a fairly busy night for that Thursday, and it was the Norman High, Norman North football game, and kind of pandemonium kind of broke out at the time. So I had one sign put out, pandemonium broke out over there, and so we dropped the trailer, handled business as we needed to in the city, and by the time calls slowed down, it was about 1:30, and so we're like, you know what? We're done for the night. So if it's possible and we can do it, that's great, but our primary purpose and mission is to make sure the city is safe overall, and so we can't sacrifice one area for the entire city overall, so we'll do what we have to do in that regard. So here was the plan from the beginning. When this first started being an issue, and honestly, my concern is if I'm a parent and I'm watching my child out here just having a good time and they can't walk the street, cross the street without getting hit by someone, whether it's a Uber driver getting impatient or someone who's intoxicated or whatever, I'm gonna have some concerns. And so I wanna make sure that we do everything we can to take safety measures here. And so I met with the Campus Corner Merchants Association, and they were 100% on board with the closure and making sure we had a safe area for people to pass. There was one person that had a gripe and complaint about it, and I asked, well, what's your concern? Well, I just don't want to change. Okay, well, what would you suggest that we do? Well, what do other cities do? And I said, well, they close the area. And I asked, I said, are you ever out after 8 or 9 p.m.? Do you see the kind of the issue? Well, I'm in bed by 8:30. Okay, so they didn't see exactly what was happening and the concern that we had. And so the other objection came from the one way in the westbound direction versus the eastbound direction. They were okay with it being one way, but they wanted east. The concern was that if people could only go one way west, that they would leave Campus Corner and never come back. And so we tried to alleviate some of those concerns and say we'll have copious amount of signage, and that would direct people back to Asp Avenue. There are 6 different ways back, and they want it east and not west. And so we ran the traffic model a bunch of different ways, tried it a bunch of different ways, and westbound is the optimal direction if we're going to turn it one way. So our request is that you would just consider that one-way direction change. It's a safer area for our pedestrians, for traffic. It's a legal one-way versus this illegal two-way thing that we have going on right now. That's kind of the only thing that makes it okay, kind of, is that it's so narrow. People have to go really slow to get through it. The one challenge is that if someone is intoxicated, it doesn't matter how slow people go. It's not going to work out well for folks. So if we have to have your consideration and your decision making on whether or not we can do this one way, and that's where we're at. Any other questions?
Why not one way the other direction?
So one of the things that we did in the spring, we ran a pilot. And when we ran the pilot in the spring, we had folks parking in the First Presbyterian parking lot across the street on University, and I didn't even know that was their parking lot. I thought it was the University parking lot, so I learned something that day. But they were gracious, and they said, hey, we're perfectly fine with that as long as people aren't there on game days or things like that when we sell these spots, or during the week, because they sell the spots during the week. As part of how they fund some of their outreach. And so they were perfectly okay with that, but we're trying as much as possible not to use private property to do a safety plan. And so if we go eastbound, any other option for people to stage is going to be private property. So if we go westbound, we can use the city's lot that is highly underutilized. I'd say probably 15 to 20 cars parked down on Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night. They just don't. And I don't think some people actually realize that the parking lot's even there and accessible, or they think they have to pay overnight. And so that's a thing that we've got to keep pushing people toward.
What are the hours of that lot, like to pay?
Till 9.
after 8 or 9.
8 to 9.
The 9, like everything else?
8 to 9, yeah.
Okay.
Monday through Saturday.
So it's perfectly accessible. The other issue is that if we have folks coming southbound on Asp when we're using it as an opportunity, going west, you can go north on Buchanan or you can go back to West University. If they're coming the eastbound direction, they can't go right, and so now we're having a little bit of a conflict with people coming
Got
south
it.
and people coming east. And so getting everyone going out is a much easier way.
That makes sense. Councilmember Bierman.
I really like this plan. I went to school in Washington, D.C., and people like to party. They have probably 5 or 6 different entertainment type areas, but there is one section near where I went to school. It's called Adams Morgan. It's on 18th Street. It's 2 lanes each way. But after 4 serious pedestrian vehicle collisions, one was a fatality. They actually closed the street from the beginning of the entertainment district to the end of the entertainment district to everything except, at that time, taxis, because there was no ride share. So they blocked it for everything except taxis. So if you were a taxi, you could get through and pick people up or drop people off. But other than that, they didn't allow traffic through because the taxis flooded to that area when they knew the bars were closing, which caused a lot of double parking and cars trying to whip around. And that's exactly how the girl got killed.
Yeah.
So I really like this. Also, living in DC, with the 6-lane roads leading in and out of the city, I'm used to daily traffic pattern changes. In the morning between 7 and 9, it's 4 lanes going into the city and 2 lanes leaving. For the rest of the day, it's 3 and 3, and in the afternoon, it's 4 lanes leaving the city, 2 lanes going in. So I think people will get used to this. I'm sure there will be some issues starting off because, as we've seen outside of one of our businesses right now with very clear signage, people still are not paying attention and drive the wrong way and nearly run headlong into someone just trying to get some coffee. So I'm sure that there will be problems at first.
Sure.
I anticipate that. I'm okay with that. But I think after maybe even one full season of this during football season, I think that people will get the hang of it, and I think long term this will be better and safer for residents of the area, for drivers in the area, for businesses in the area. So I think this is really well done. I look forward to seeing it in action, and hopefully we can start keeping people safer, because I'm starting to get very concerned about that in that area.
And that was the issue. Is I didn't want to wait until we had a fatality before we did something.
And I
if we see
really-
an issue, then we should fix it.
Yep.
I really appreciate you being proactive on this. It's much better to see us do that than again to be reactive. Council member, what's your name again? Carter.
It's old doodad.
I was very impressed by your presentation and appreciate the thought it looks like you've really put into it and the tests that you've done with the traffic, patterns and exploring the private versus public, options. That makes sense to me. And your involvement with the traffic division and coordinating with them, and then your interaction with the local businesses. I've had feedback, real positive feedback from the business community. So I'm very impressed and want to support your plan.
Thank you very much. And long term, we're exploring right now a number of federal grants. We don't have anything secured whatsoever. We haven't even written anything, but I've looked up a bunch of different grants so that we can long term potentially have telescopic bollards on that south and north end. That's what they do in Austin. They've got some down in New Orleans. And so essentially during the day, those things are down, but about 8 or 9 p.m. those things come up, and then there's no vehicle traffic inside that area. And so
That would be amazing.
that would be awesome if we do that long term. So there's vision for a long term plan, but
What'd you
this
call
is
them?
telescopic bollards. They just come out of the ground.
Got they do in DC.
Councilmember Hall, did you have a question?
Yes. I also am impressed. It seems like a really creative solution to problems that we're having and maybe preventing a tragedy down the road. You really did an excellent presentation because you've answered almost all the questions that I had coming here. Do all the businesses close at 2 a.m.?
Yes.
Okay,
Except
so
for-
Campus Corner is effectively shut down at 2 a.m. on the weekend.
For people that serve alcohol. Now,
Okay.
the food locations are the ones that stay open after that. So Diamond Dogs,
Okay.
occasionally Fuzzies, and then Picklemans. They stay open, and that's where we get our influx of people going to ASP.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one reason why ASP is the primary concern area, because you have a bunch of folks that are, it's eat o'clock 30.
Yeah.
So they all want to go have a bite to eat, and that's where it gets messy.
Does the, I mean, I,
Bus to Waffle
2,000 to 3,000 people is a significant number of pedestrians in that small area. So does it drop off dramatically after 2 a.m.?
Yes,
Or-
usually by about 1:45, 1:50, it's a lot lower. Folks are starting to filter out, and what we did notice on Friday night with our closure is that by about 1:30, it was starting to filter out. We would have torn down a little bit sooner, but we had about 3 different DUIs that were working very close by. I didn't want to unleash a bunch of extra traffic into the area where we've got DUIs that are happening, so we waited until a couple of those cleared out and the roadway cleared before we opened up.
Then my other question about that is how much, is there a police presence after 2 a.m. or are you just patrolling at that point?
We go back to normal patrol.
Okay.
There's really about, I'd say, 40 people max that tend to be out there past 2:15.
And you probably don't know the answer to this, but this would be a Sarah Kaplan question too. I'm just curious about the dashboard after the comparison between the hours that you're proposing to close and then if the rideshare requests drop off, what the drop off is after all the bars are closed.
Well, Uber and Lyft have been great, and they, Uber was a little bit slower than Lyft, but they geo-fenced the area for us.
Oh, okay.
And so they've designated that White and Buchanan location as a rideshare pickup and drop-off spot, and so they can't even pick up on ASP as far as building a call in there. They'll send them right to that location.
And I really appreciate the fact that you were getting input from the Campus Corner Merchants Association, because I was concerned about the one-way, closing that one,
Sure.
closing White, but when you describe the dimensions and how much trouble that is, that seems like a really smart solution for pedestrian safety. Thank you for your presentation.
Councilmember Patron.
So you mentioned the telescopic thing.
Ballers.
Forgot the name of that. What is it?
Ballers.
Ballard.
Ballers.
Has a D in it.
Oh, I like ballers better. Anyway.
They're a nautical term.
Chocolate.
I know, I was totally. Sorry. Continue.
Okay, so anyway, my thought was this can't happen, but it's worth a try. We just recently approved a grant from the Department of Homeland Security for the police department for surveillance equipment. So maybe we could make the argument that in a very small area with a lot of crowds that we need it for those purposes too, and maybe we could get a grant that way. I don't know, just a thought, but
That's above my pay grade, so I'm going to defer it.
what was that?
Above his pay grade.
Oh yeah. Well, anyway, we were just throwing it out there. Anyway, let's see what else I had written. Oh yeah, parking meter mercy. Maybe the following morning, if people that leave their cars on a closed area,
Absolutely.
could maybe ask the.
Outside of game days, by all means.
Yeah, Sunday morning is what I'm thinking, and maybe we closed it down on Saturday night and getting their car, maybe give them until noon or something like that. And I just really appreciate that you're not going straight to writing massive tickets to people for jaywalking, and you can tell that you're very compassionate about saving lives, and I appreciate how much you care about these people. We're lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Holman.
So I appreciate your work on this, Carl. And I agree with most everything in this. I think most of it is a great idea. Closing ASP is definitely a good idea when it's busy like this. And I've worked nights on Campus Corner for about 9 years and have witnessed how it works. And my only concern that I've had about the plan is the one-way conversion, mainly because in my observation, the street being narrow and being two-way causes people to drive very slowly on that street. And my concern about it being one way is based on my observations. People drive the wrong way on Buchanan every single night, multiple times, every night. There's signs. It's been one way forever. It's never been two way. But every night people drive the wrong way on Buchanan. And people drive faster on one-way streets because there's not a conflict. There's no cars coming. There's no cars turning on there. I feel like people will come down Buchanan and they will say, well, police aren't here. nobody's looking. Asp is just right there. I'm gonna cut across there real quick. So those would be my concern about that. I do think from a safety standpoint, it absolutely makes sense for it if it's one way to go west, as you recommend. I think from the businesses, the Campus Corner Association, I think from their standpoint, it makes sense for it to go east because they're looking at it as west is directing traffic out of Campus Corner, east is bringing them in. So you can see it from both ways. I think I'm not entirely opposed to the one way. That is some of my concerns about it. And I really do like the idea of the sidewalk on the south side. It's absolutely necessary. And I really want us to find how much that would cost, what it would take to get it done. And I would like to see maybe that happen before we do a one-way, permanent one-way, or maybe at the same time. Because it is a lot. It's very narrow. And before we redid White Street was just completely redone 6 or 7 years ago. I mean, ripped out, completely redone from the bottom up. And before, it didn't even have that little sidewalk on the south side. It was like a busted curb that was kind of slanted. So, but that being that little space there, and then the railing being right there, it is really difficult. And people really walk on that side of the street more than the north side where the sidewalk is because they're coming from Asp, they're going over to Valare, or they're coming to the deli, or they're going back around to Buchanan to go to some of the places there. So I'm really supportive of that sidewalk project. I think that's something that really needs to happen on Campus Corner. And I would prefer that we think about the one-way thing a little bit further and try to get that sidewalk in before we make that decision. And I had mentioned in the studies or the committee meeting that there are a couple examples around town where we have temporary one-way streets around some of the elementary schools where it's one way between 5 and 6 or whatever the pickup time is.
Lincoln.
Maybe we could look at something like that. So whenever we close Asp down for the night, White Street becomes a one-way street going westbound. I also love the idea, the pickup and drop-off spots, because in my observations on Campus Corner, that has been a real serious problem. Is people just stopping and picking up anywhere they want, and then you have a long line of cars, and people get impatient, and the horns start honking, and so that's been a real problem. And I'm really glad to see this. And from what I understand, over the weekend, those drop-off spots were already working really well. So I really like this plan. My only apprehension is those ones I mentioned, and would like to maybe see us do a little bit more work, maybe consider a temporary one-way while we think about the permanent a little bit longer. But I would definitely like Public Works staff to do some more details on that sidewalk, because we really gotta, if we need to find a way to get an easement or get some property from that parking lot, or what do we need, whatever we need to do, or if we decide to make the street one way and we can use some of the street easement to build a bigger sidewalk, I would be supportive of that. So thank you very much, Carl.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Lights back on now.
All right, yes, I don't see any other questions. Lieutenant, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Carl.
Well done.
Coached my son.
So what I'm hearing is consensus of moving it forward. I didn't hear any, I saw some head nods in response to Councilmember Holman's suggestion. Give me some feedback on what are you thinking? Are you wanting to do the temporary thing, or are we ready just to go forward? Let's give some direction. Okay, Councilmember Bierman.
I think maybe a little bit more info from Public Works about, I don't know if you had done a review of what that would mean or what it would cost, if anything, cost of doing it alongside the sidewalk, cost of doing sidewalk first. I mean, I think some additional information about what it would mean from you guys. Not that I don't trust NPD,
Sure.
but
No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Mayor and Council. We've begun some of our work on that. We're trying to take this step first. If council supports the general concept, we're ready to bring back some numbers on what it would take to finance the sidewalk construction. I think we have space in the right-of-way to do it. It's going to take a reconstruction of that curb, but ADA accessibility is really important to this, and we don't have that today. So that's another great advantage of doing the sidewalk project now, which we think is really necessary. So we can have that to you in a matter of days, certainly a week or so, if it helps to make that final decision.
And as we work through the White Street discussion, I am hearing everyone wants to go ahead and approve the campus corner closure
Yes.
pedestrian safety plans. All right, that's solid. Okay, Wilson, Holman.
I always thought, well, I didn't always think, but every now and then when I'm driving down White eastbound, I think, oh, is this one-way street? It always kind of panics me because it looks like it's a one-way street going westbound to me. So I don't care, but as long as the merchants are okay with it, that would be my concern. And then I would like to see that sidewalk happen. Can they not just take that little fence thing down?
It's private
Private
property.
property.
It is a property line, but
Yeah.
that fence.
Okay. That was my input.
Thank you. Councilmember Holman?
I was just going to mention the temporary, making White Street temporarily one-way when we close ASP because the police are already there, posted on those corners. So that's like I said, when they're not there is when I would see people ignoring the fact that it's one way and using it to go the other way. But when ASP is closed, the police will be there and they can make it well known and cite people for going the wrong way if they. I guess I don't know the exact. Legal staff might have to look at that if you can write a ticket for going the wrong way on it temporarily. I don't know. So,
Okay.
thanks.
Councilmember Carter?
Councilmember Holman, you're obviously the most experienced person with this area. So are you suggesting, like, what do you mean by temporary? You think we should try it for 6 months?
It would
I mean,
be.
throw us a
Yeah.
time frame that you're
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know the exact time frame, but starting immediately when we close, when the police decide to close ASP Street, that White would be temporarily turned to one way while they're doing that. And then as we figure out how much the sidewalk will cost, how, that, whether we want to make it permanent or not. Could be a matter of a few months.
Well, that sounds reasonable. I don't know how you phrased, does that mean we change, is there a written motion already or something?
I'm not sure. I know on Cruz Street by McKinley, between Pickard and Flood, it is
right.
temporarily one way
7 to 4.
from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m.
Just like by Lincoln. you
Monday
and I-
through
Yeah.
Friday.
So it could be a situation like that in the temporary until we figure out if we want to make it one way permanently, and then if we can get this sidewalk thing would be.
Why don't we take a look at that and see
Okay.
what that would take?
Okay.
As well as the sidewalk numbers and bring that back to you.
Overall, I think it's
All
a
right.
good idea. So.
We have a short term.
We went ahead and brought them back in here. So Councilmember Holman, will you describe your suggestion again?
While we figure out the cost of doing the sidewalk and if we want to make it permanently one way going westbound, that we do a temporary, basically anytime you guys close Asp Street, White Street would become temporarily a one-way westbound. And I think the merchants wouldn't be as concerned about it being one-way westbound if it's 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. As much as they would be during the daytime for lunch crowds and stuff. So doing that while we work on the long term, making it permanently one way, and the sidewalk funding and how we might do that. So,
Absolutely.
because I'm thinking if we do the sidewalk might require some of the street space, and if that's the case, we would need to make it a one-way street because there definitely wouldn't be enough room for it to be two-way then. So,
Absolutely doable.
yeah, okay.
I think
Councilmember
that's a
Hall?
good intermediate step.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, so I'm hearing we want to go ahead and pass the campus corner pedestrian safety plan, and we want to look at temporary, not so much in terms of like a 6-month thing, but more of a when ASP is closed, White becomes one-way westbound. And as we're exploring with Public Works, the cost and timeline for expanding the sidewalk to make it ADA accessible, once we have that and are prepared to move forward, at that time, if we make these improvements, it's going to be small enough where we need to just make it happen. So that, am I hearing this all correctly? Is everyone in agreement with that, Councilmember Holman?
And I was just going to say, Carl, my thoughts on it too were that because you all would be there, people wouldn't violate that one way. So since you'd be there closing Asp Street, then they would be less likely to break that rule. Yeah, right. right. So
Need you guys to go sit outside cool beans right now?
we need you on every corner.
Pay attention to the sign.
All right, any other questions or comments about these changes to Campus Corner? All right, I think we have our plan of action moving forward. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Lieutenant. All right, please don't go anywhere, council. We need to enter into executive session.
Yay! I love executive session.
I love your attitude.
They were already made.
Positivity. How you doing? Good to see you.
So does Campus Corner get no say-so in that?